My name is Adam Olsen, your host of Innovation Heroes, and I want to thank you for joining us live today. We are very excited about this space with our special guest, Amy Wilson. Amy is the founder and chief empathy officer of Empathy for Change. We had an extremely difficult time today deciding where we were going to go with our conversation because Amy has had such a diverse and interesting career. She is a best-selling author of Empathy for Change: How to Build a More Understanding World. She has served as a Presidential Innovation Fellow in the White House, built numerous accelerator programs across different markets, and where we're going to focus today is Amy has worked at Booz Allen to help them build a culture for innovation. So welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today. I probably didn't do your outstanding career justice with my quick overview. So before we get started, maybe you could share a little bit more about your journey and what's led you to where you are today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to kind of be having this journey and this conversation with you along the way. Um, Founder of Empathy for Change, and it's it's something that is near and dear to my heart. But you don't really get to hear the whole story of how I got to this time and got to this space. So Empathy for Change is now a cooperative that helps create cultures and communities where people can be their whole selves. So we work on helping to transform ourselves, organizations, and sometimes society through compassion that helps being of all. And what we try to do is really take a bias towards action. And the quick thing you mentioned my time at Booz Allen Hamilton, um, where I was about 10 years ago was asked to build a culture of innovation at the firm. 25,000 people across the whole world, and they put me and five other people in a room. It was like, figure it out. And it was such an interesting kind of like thrown into the world of like entrepreneurship, innovation. I didn't have like I had a proclivity towards innovation, but I didn't have the words and the language for that yet. And then I ended up in 2015, after I kind of helped build that culture of innovation. Obviously didn't change all hearts and minds in just 3 years during that time, but in 2015 I started working with the Obama administration as an entrepreneur in residence for them. So I got to have my hands in many different pies as the end of the administration. Um, and I also got to kind of create a shared language around innovation and change, and was able to create, as I transitioned from the Obama administration into the Trump administration, this movement called the Better Government Movement. And it allowed different people to have a psychologically safe place where they can engage and grow and kind of share the challenges that they're having, and kind of just like be better at creating a government that works for all of us. So that's a little bit about like where I've been, and because of Empathy for Change, how it is, I'm an entrepreneur. So my days on a more like day-to-day level as an entrepreneur, my days are is quite varied. So I have like a general frame of reference for the week ahead with different meetings or workshops I might have. But depending on what happens in those meetings, it takes me in different direction. But like this week in particular, I'm focusing on, I just did a talk yesterday at the Designing for Empathy Summit in DC. And I'm at the summit today and tomorrow as well, but then the Twitter Spaces with you today. And then this evening, I'm going to do a fireside chat to talk about my career as an entrepreneur at a startup pitch event. So it's kind of a lot of like, in-person things, but also like really down and in the details, trying to get the work done.
Wow, you have an awful lot on your plate. You're extremely busy, so thank you again for taking a few moments to chat with us. And I always found, like through the conversations we've had, that your approach to innovation is very unique compared to some of the other people I've talked to, because you seem to really take a position of putting the emphasis on the people that are innovating and putting them in a good position to be creative and put their best foot forward. And you know, is there something that really set you in that direction to put a focus on that side of things, whereas I feel like a lot of people, they're more focused on that end goal, that like what is the success or the innovation we need to be driving.
Yeah, I think that there's lots of things that get me into the space of just thinking on people, but I think as I write about in my book, I talk about the fact that on one side of the spectrum, I have a lot of empathy, and the book is Empathy for Change. And so I am an empath. I'm a highly sensitive person. And also, a empathy is my biggest strength. Like I've taken the Strength Finders test, and I was in Booz Allen when I took that test for the first time, and I was like, "Wait, my number one strength is empathy. Like, what is that?" And like, I didn't necessarily see that around the systems that I was in, and I was like, "Wait, there's something off here." And even something like when I was at Booz Allen, I learned change management, and I always kind of questioned that because it's like you can't really manage change, and it's like it always felt like in some ways, and also in the design world of human-centered design, it always felt a mismatch of people who have power at the top is deciding things for people who are at the bottom, and that kind of power dynamic just never really sat well with me. And it's really interesting, going back to the idea of change management, is that McKinsey, another management consulting firm who essentially created the idea of change management and kind of pushed it forward, came back to write about 4 or 5 years ago an article to look back, like what kind of impact have we made to with this change management that we're doing. And they found when in their research that 70% of change efforts fail. And I was like, okay, so like my instincts before, my intuition before being like, ooh, this is not a people-centered thing, um, really like shifted. Like it was like that intuition was very right, because the things that I was being taught essentially were like not even working out, because you can't force people to change. So I think the biggest thing is my intuition, because of empathy and human and being a highly sensitive person, and then empathy also just came to bear for that.
Yeah, that's so cool. You took something that you realized wasn't working, the data was saying it wasn't working, and then you turned it around to leverage the strength that you knew you had, and made some really interesting changes. So I think that's amazing. And we're really seeing a
Mhm.
lot more these days where empathy is really becoming a more sought after strength. I feel like maybe in the past, in traditional business efforts, it wasn't as thought of as being as important as it is becoming today. I mean, I like to think HeroX is an extremely has a lot of empathy, and that's why we have an incredible work culture, and everyone on our team works so hard, and we're happy going to work every day, and those things make such a difference. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about work culture, so maybe we can dive into that. Um, you know, Workplace culture, it can make all the difference in an organization. It can really make or break things. As I mentioned, it's something that we really pride ourselves on at HeroX. But maybe before we dive into um, how we can create the best possible work culture, maybe you could shed some light on some of the negative things you've come across while supporting some of the people in their workplace trauma. I know you do a lot of work around that with
Mhm.
some of your support group.
Mhm. Absolutely. Like I think the word trauma is is very nuanced, and it's a rabbit hole that some people can go after. Loaded word. So not every kind of negative experience in the workplace or outside the world is trauma. Two people can really have the same experience, but experience the same event with two different responses. So, but one thing I know very deeply is I know that trauma is inflicted regularly in some workplaces and still does, but that severity of the trauma varies across cultures. And I kind of use my work as and my own story to talk about this, um, about this idea of trauma. And I have been diagnosed with this thing called complex PTSD. And so complex PTSD is essentially like I have a post-traumatic stress disorder, but a version of it where I've had lots of different kind of traumas over time. That is a whole rabbit hole, and I can go down some other time if anybody wants to talk about it. But what I've learned from being diagnosed with that and going on my own healing journey is that trauma lives in our bodies. And I've read a lot about from Resmaa Menakem in his book My Grandmother's Hands, and Bessel van der Kolk and The Body Keeps the Score. So there's many forms that trauma takes. There's generational trauma, racial, early childhood disasters and displacements. Other trauma can be workplace trauma. So it really helps to get a sense of help with therapy first, including somatic therapy, like what I've been working on, to kind of work on our individual needs, but then there's deep healing happening in support groups. And I think it's a combination of these two helps us move to a place from where we're hurting and being hurt by kind of dominant oppressive systems that we're in, and then finally helping other people to achieve their goals. You're working from hurting to healing and then to helping. So over the past year, I've built out the support group called Healing from Work, which has been focusing on kind of that first half of the spectrum of being like, okay, we know that there's harm that's been created in our workplace. How do we move to a place of healing? And the idea is that if we do this in community with other people, there's a lot of healing that can happen. And then also eventually action can happen, which is also adding more healing as well. A lot of these challenges of workplace trauma have come up in this group, and there are some things that we have in we have a whole set of readings that we have to kind of remind us of some of the dysfunctional work that we're having. And I'll just share a little bit from this excerpt that we have. I'll just share the first paragraph because we could go on a little more, but we believe that our modern work system is founded in the most destructive elements of dominant oppressive culture and the underlying personal, intergenerational, and societal trauma that causes it. Because of this, almost all of us are experiencing ongoing dysfunction by participating in this work system, which affects our personal and professional lives. And so this is kind of painting a bleak picture in the sense that, I think we're not of denial that these workplaces that we're in are not creating trauma or have affected us and have affected our personal and professional lives. And it actually gives us hope to have us to figure out what could be next, right? So but in the what could come and how we can change things. And um some of the topics that come up in the group um is in the past year we've focused on topics like setting boundaries, imposter syndrome, burnout, tapping into your intuition. And so sometimes we have this thing of open sharing, sometimes there's workbooks and check-ins. And then I've been going tapping into my intuition. It's been around there's some things that like boundaries, for example, that requires us to go deeper. So we've had a separate section just on us talking about how do we set better boundaries at work and in life. And um, so what's interesting is like what I was mentioning before is like that is through community, we can kind of find connection with other humans and share messages of strength, hope, and love. So we feel like we're no longer alone, but we also have other people who understand us and help us see that light at the end of the tunnel. I find it really powerful to do this work and experiment in this way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like I think it's really important when you're looking at developing an ideal work or company culture to really understand like what the things are that can impact your team negatively, right? And I think there's
Mm-hmm.
a few things that I heard while you were speaking, and there's so many different levels and layers of where this work life trauma can come from, right? If it's not an inclusive environment, if you're not feeling supported or challenged, or um, like many different aspects of things can provide a negative environment. And the one thing we obviously want to kind of focus on a little bit today is that innovation focused culture, and how we can position our team and our employees to feel like they're supported in their ideas, and that we're moving forward towards an innovative goal. And that and I think about my team, that's the kind of, especially working in innovation, that's the kind of stuff that I feel like really fuels us, that excitement of
Mm-hmm.
working
Mm-hmm.
in innovation. And being excited about work, or not being excited about work, is something that can really make a difference between having a happy employee or an unhappy employee. So when
Mm-hmm.
we kind of flip over here and we look at, we just took a look at what the negatives were, and some ways that people can be affected in a unfortunate culture. What does that innovation focused culture look like to you, and when you're working with organizations to support them? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's always good to learn from on one side of the spectrum, like what harm could happen, but then on the other side, like what is good, right? What is good and bad about like a modern workplace. Uh, and and like I mentioned before, I've been building cultures of innovation for more than a decade, and I and this is something I share deeper in my book, is that I also feel uncomfortable with the word innovation because it has become an overused word and it really loses its meaning. And it's the very contextual as well. If you are surrounded by people who do innovation, there's many different kinds of innovation. So also, this idea has been used to create harm by kind of creating a space of the haves, the people who have innovation versus the people who like have nots. So, which is essentially creating a culture that we want to avoid, is being like there's people who are privileged and some people who aren't. So at the end of the day, what I think is that people want to have organizations where we're working together with a shared purpose and vision, and where we can feel like we can be a human at work, and not judged, or for being that human that we're out there, that's out there. So one of the constants that I found in this idea of leading cultures of innovation and change is that really trying to make the world a better place. But I also noticed that not everybody sees the world in the same way. Um, so for example, I called the movement the Better Government movement, and it grew like wildfire because people could say, okay, the larger goal at the end of the day was how can we create better government? And so when I think about this work around innovation, what we're trying to do is to make a positive change. So I reframe innovation kind of like, this, it's innovation really equals positive change. And the deeper concept that I bring up in is you actually have to have a pathway to do that, is to have deep empathy, deep compassion, and plus action. So the people that I've been engaging with and been interviewed for this book point to the importance of centering our design of those with experience, or living experience or lived experience, and then trying to get to a place where we're designing the world with each other rather than for them. And that's the basic definition of empathy. It's you're feeling with somebody rather than for them. So what does that really look like when we're talking about positive change we live and work? So I think it's a culture focused, on creating actual humans, and like where people can live in all of their own variety as a human, but also helping to achieve equity. So trying to give people what they need. And I think when we talk about being human, we're all looking for relationships and organizations where we feel safe and secure, we feel connected, we can grow, and we matter to ourselves. Like we really, can really love ourselves and are in community with others. And there's balance that happens in everything that we do. And what I found in the work is that change happens. It all starts with and ends with us, because people change themselves, and it's not, you can't force people to change. And it's just like it's kind of more the relational thing that gets that change to happen and leads to innovation in my book.
Yeah, well, we have to constantly be changing, and that's something that we always need to account for, especially as leaders and teams and things like that. And when you speak about having, feeling safe in your work environment and feel it like humanizing it, and feeling heard and things like that, contributing to a great innovation culture. One thing that kind of sticks out in my mind is um, running internal innovation challenges. Because obviously, in my world, I'm really focused
Hmm.
on building
Hmm.
external teams and communities. But I found and heard from multiple people that a fantastic way to really engage their stakeholders and their internal team and making everyone feel heard, and allowing them to contribute to innovation or R&D, whether they're on the marketing team or HR or whatever, is kind of running internal prize challenges or innovation challenges.
Hmm.
How do you feel about that? Do you think this fits in well with this idea of approaching an innovation culture with empathy?
Hmm. Well, it depends on who are the people that you're engaging with and working with. If you're out there, there's your stakeholders are outside of the organization. It builds trust and um, and like and power, not just for yourself. The whole idea is for you to share power and give agency over to different groups of people. And when people feel like they are part of something, that they can shape something and they have agency, which agency is essentially this human feeling that they can actually have influence and change the world around them. And that things aren't just happening to them, that they actually participate in that change. When you have that space where I am actually part of this, you're going to win people over, and that has been proven time and time again with my work and with other people's work. Is that when you add this element of participatory design or co-creation, which is essentially just being like having a two-way dialogue and making sure you're taking action based on the needs of the audience and group that you're talking to.
Yeah, exactly. You want to make everyone feel like they're really contributing and having a say in the direction that the organization is going, not just, being told what to do or being a number and
Hmm.
following task work. So, I think that's
Exactly.
why the few people I've spoken to that have ran internal challenges have had some really positive feedback from their teams, just because it gives them the power to contribute and they want to have their ideas heard. Um, so, I guess that's one tool that potentially people can maybe look into using. What
Hmm.
other steps can we start taking to achieve this type of innovation culture?
Hmm. Yeah, so I actually have a framework for this that I have developed, that after all these different things, I paused working in these culture of innovation for a decade, and I was just like, why aren't we changing things faster? Why aren't things changing in a bigger way? So I created a framework, and it's found in part 3 of the book, where it's called empathy in action. And so it's called the heart, the head, the hand framework. And that's actually a big theme throughout the whole book. So it allows us to kind of catalyze change within our organizations. So that when we talk about empathy in action, that's that idea also equals positive change equals innovation, has the 3 components. Like the head is our rational side thinking, our heart is our emotional side, and the hand is putting all of that into work and into action. So and the last part, the hand, is also known as compassionate empathy, so or just simply compassion. So these those are 3 kinds of empathy that shows up into the world too. So what the framework really focuses on is having us start with the heart, our emotions. It's really starting with like purpose, why we're here, why do we exist, what is the mission, and our connection to it. The second piece that's in that heart part of the framework is a second part is people, who we have to really go deep and understand who's in the room, who are we, what is our identities, how do we show up at work, in the work, because if you're doing it within the workplace yourself, or if you're actually showing up and you're designing an external challenge, for example. So you have to kind of know who the key players are. You might do something like a power mapping session. Who has power and how can you use that power in strategic ways to get the outcome you want. And also what's important too is like, who's not in the room and should be in the room is a big question you ask. So that's kind of really thinking about that emotional side, like the people and the purpose, and centering around those 2 things. Then you go into the head part of the framework, which is that thinking rational side. So thinking like things like principles and values we have as an organization. What do we want to be like when we grow up? Um, and principles are kind of like ideas, values, and beliefs of what we're going to be doing in our journey ahead. And then we have the idea of policies, where you review the policies that you have and the ones that you want to create. So kind of starting to see what mandates can you create based on that all that internal work you've done. And then the final piece of that framework is looking at the hand. So again, putting it all into action and having compassion in what we do. And we examine 2 things in this, where you look at the practices that you do every day to make sure that we're living within our values and our principles. So these are all conversations, a series of conversations you have with each other, to be like, how are we putting this into something that is part of the culture and not just something that is outside of it and you're just doing on an individual basis. And the last portion of the hand piece is process. So how are you getting from point A to point B? Like, how are you doing the work? How are we doing things? Are we using things like human-centered design? Are we doing lean practices, lean startup practices, or agile practices? These are all like kind of methodologies. Are you using a consulting model? And then you can start thinking about, okay, are we building a product or a service or a program out there in the world? So yeah, so that's really centering everything on like that whole body experience, the community building that I mentioned before, because community see the whole person. And I
Hmm.
see a culture as a person too, almost, right? It's like a living, breathing thing.
Yeah, that's such a cool approach, and I really love the fact that you say the heart is at the center of it, because at the end of the day, we're emotional beings, and like companies have values and emotions and things as well, and getting those things aligned, I feel, is an amazing foundation for getting the team to be moving as a unit and as one in the right direction in unity. Um,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
something that we take pride in is our company core values. We hire pretty much strictly on culture fit and alignment with those values, and that's why I really feel like we have an amazing team that kind of exactly what you said, like moves in that unity. One thing that just popped in my mind
Hmm.
listening to you
Hmm.
talk about that, kind of looping back into my world and some of the world that our listeners are interested in is that external crowdsourcing, and we're talking right now about building an amazing internal company culture, and I think that is such an
Hmm.
important first focus, because if you don't have that figured out, then I don't think you're really in the best position to start going externally. But I'd love to get your
Hmm.
opinion kind of on you know, maybe how we could start thinking about this process of putting the heart at the center when we're looking for external help, like when we're running a crowdsourcing prize challenge. Because as you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, one thing HeroX does a lot is we support our clients with, challenge design and designing a prize challenge to put out to the crowd. But what if we started, like, as we help people and organizations do that, if we really started supporting them and diving deeper into their company values and into their heart and their organizational emotions and putting that into a challenge, I can't see that not benefiting, um, you know, the crowd that you build, the engagement that you get from external people when you're really putting your heart on your sleeve and putting your values out there as well. I know that's
Hmm.
that's not probably the best way to finish off my question, but do you have any thoughts on
It's
that?
okay.
Because
Yeah.
you just got my wheels spinning a little bit there when you were speaking like that, and how we can kind of transfer that over into the external environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this framework is exactly like when you think of a framework, it's a way of thinking about a concept. So, and also I have been working in crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, a lot of different worlds. Like I that was the first my first foray into kind of like this open innovation world, like 10 years ago. Because when I was at Booz Allen, we had this ideas festival where it was just kind of like very traditional. You submit it was like an RFP process. It was like you submit something, and you um, then you just hope that the gods, the leaders at the top, are going to pick your idea, right? It was a very closed process. And what I love about crowdsourcing and open innovation is that I really big idea of open. Like a lot of work and a lot of power shifting when you open something. So it's open, it's participatory, it's peer driven. That's where a lot of like innovative things happen. So when going back to that concept, when I was at Booz Allen, I was in the Ideas Festival. We get selected to be the top 10, one of the top 10 ideas. And the idea was how might we take the kind of like the zeitgeist at the time, this was the early 2010s, um, is around crowdsourcing and how do we apply it and start selling a product at Booz Allen, which was the first time Booz Allen was actually creating a product that then we would sell to external clients. And so taking that idea of that idea, and then the next time we come around with the Ideas Festival, we ended up winning some money to build out the product, and then the next year we're able to then use that work to apply it to the Ideas Festival. So therefore, before it was a closed process where only a select few choose the ideas, now you're opening it up to everybody in the firm votes on ideas. And you can have different kinds of moderation in there, of course, depending on what you feel like. But it allows you to open the process up to allow people to say, okay, you're now moving from this power dynamic of us versus them to be like, we're all in this together. You can design with. And I've got so many instances of like crowdsourcing that I have used in the past with some of my clients, that could be used just to like build lots of different, like build um, a a report out, right? And to get more information from other groups of people to think about what the future might be like, bringing together like this idea of futurism with culture, with building out a report that looks at the future of wildland fire management, for example. So to bring this all full circle, back to the concept of crowdsourcing, kind of like culture, there can be lots of different designs that you can do to that you can have like standard like crowdsourcing challenges where people can kind of crowdsource from thousands of people from around the world what might be your values that you're trying to do, or like your shared values, or even like what are the practices that you want to have, and people submit ideas based on those practices that you want to create and more in the action piece. So I think all of these things are definitely possible, and you can use that or an internal us internally or externally. And that's really what we did at Booz Allen too, was we created this thing called the garage, which was an internally faced crowdsourcing platform that was a space for us to like, just like in the garage, like the Silicon Valley garage, you can come in and share ideas and then build those ideas out to actually make them happen in the world. So yeah, so I think that's definitely doable, and also like a great way to expand that kind of process of building out this. Sometimes it can be perceived as very insular, but when you build it out in the open and put things out in the open like that, it really shifts everything for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, I love that that idea of kind of using the external innovation to support your internal culture. I think that's super cool. Like getting the crowd to give you some feedback on that. So if we have any
Hmm.
listeners that think
Yeah.
that's also a cool idea, I would love to support on running a challenge like that. I think that would be very cool. So please reach out to me if you're interested, because I think that would be a ton of fun. On that note, I know you mentioned earlier, Amy, about your
Adam, I think,
passion
oh, I
on.
think you're breaking up over there. I
Oh,
can barely hear
sorry.
you.
Is it any better now? Hello?
Adam?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I
Hello?
can hear you now. Yes, you just popped
Okay.
in. Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. It wouldn't be a proper you know podcast or live event if we didn't have a couple technical difficulties. Um,
All good.
but no, what I was saying was, I know you mentioned earlier about your passion about building an engaging community. How do you feel about those external communities and how that can impact internal culture? I know sometimes internal teams can almost feel a little threatened, almost, if you're trying to outsource too much. What's your experience been in that?
Hmm. Yeah, so I am quite passionate about engaging and building communities, and it goes down to I use that same process of like the heart, the head, the hand framework to kind of build that community. And so, but external communities can actually really be very supportive to that impacts internal culture. So, and I actually just think about it on like a personal level. I guess we can have more dialogue about like on a more like on a mass level, like if we're trying to do external communities, as in, trying to get like crowdsource, these ideas and values and such, because that's very nuanced, and I'm happy to talk more about it. But what I'm seeing is that, and I was just presenting on that this yesterday at the Designing for Empathy Summit, is that we're really what the data is showing us about how we are as in culture in our world is that we're a deeply lonely country. Or not just in the country, but deeply lonely across the board. And we're in need of human connection, and we really haven't cracked the code on how we might find it and cultivate that. So community is really essential to our belonging, and our culture, our workplaces are undergoing a deep identity crisis, and we might not know how to express ourselves. or have a place where we feel kind of emotionally and psychologically safe. And it really hinders, at the end of the day, linking it back to this idea of empathy and compassion, it hinders that ability for us to be compassionate with ourselves and with others. And so a big part of change, right, in the big C change is the fact that we're each one of us are, like, part of that change. And gets down to this idea that Dr. Martin Luther King envisioned, which was this idea of called beloved community. He believed that this beloved community society can be based on justice, equal opportunity, and love for one's fellow human beings. And it sounds somewhat utopian because the way he talks about it. But I think that these things are possible with the time and effort that you put into it, right? The awareness that you build within yourself. And at the end of the day, like, this idea of the community allows us to get to a place of what I call the great awakening, where it comes down to, and this is something I learned from one of my Buddhist meditation teachers, is the awakening comes down to giving intention and paying attention to the work that you're doing. It's awareness, building awareness, and then focused awareness. But at the end of the day, making sure that we are accountable in love and um, and to the intentions that we set into the world. So, but at the end of the day, like, as we do this great awakening that we're all going to be experiencing in the next little bit, I think that communities create opportunities for us as individuals to feel like we're not alone, and that all people are flawed and we can grow into fully realized humans. We can share stories and narratives about who we are and what connects us. We are also can meet different people from different backgrounds, and help break down preconceived notions about others and realize that we're more alike than we are different. And then also we can find out other people who care about the same issues and help us to act. So there's some action collaboratives that have been stood up in communities that I'm in. So it creates kind of like this ripple effect that goes to a place of, like, more connection and community building. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to build is a safe space where we can be witnessed in all of our, like, messy selves, and it paves the way for healing ourselves, but also, like, a big dose of change that can happen through the healing that we have as either individually or even a systems level.
Wow, those some fantastic insights in there. And I know, speaking of the healing, you've touched on that.
Hmm.
That's been mentioned a couple times in the conversation. I know you wanted to offer a bit of a sneak peek to our listeners today of what
Hmm.
you have on the go and what's coming up for you. And I might just combine that with a question of, your share the sneak peek and what's going on personally, but also your vision for, innovation and where the industry and the significant changes are going to be over the next, 3 to 5 years.
Yes, and blending those together is actually pretty great because it's actually I that is what I'm working on right now, like healing and understanding what is happening in the world, and sensing and having that intuition, which my strength of empathy allows me to do. And so I mentioned at the top of this that there's a cooperative that I'm building. So it's kind of a working agreement with, like, a shared purpose and value where we're starting to co-create things together in that it should exist in the world. Think of it kind of like crowdsourcing, but in a format that allows us to kind of share profits and look out for each other's mutual benefit. Um, and there's some outgrowths that are happening from this cooperative that I've been softly building in the past few years, but now kind of materializing. Is like, I have a new podcast called the Empathy Power Up that just relaunched on Monday. It was LinkedIn Live, and then we turned it into a podcast based on feedback that we got from people. But it's like 20 minutes of empathy goodness that we give to you every week because we think that empathy and compassion can be energizing. So I do that with, like, a collaborator named Kevin Shaw. And then a second collaboration I have in this cooperative is what we're tentatively calling being human at work. And it's transforming the self and the company at the same time to help achieve deeper results. So, doing this with a master storyteller and to uncover our collective stories at the end of the day. That there's a lot of things that we're focusing on, things about like changing the system and applying storytelling in ways that we can apply it in systems change, looking at storytelling through the lens of light as glue and as web. So we can use story to illuminate the pathways ahead, as glue to band us together and to reauthor the webs of narratives we live in. And then finally, as web, to kind of be like, we got these web of narratives, but it can be a personal web of narratives, a cultural web, or a mythic web of how we talk about our bigger culture in a bigger way. So that group is launching in 2023. We're building that out. And then when it comes to the idea of what's changing in the industry over the next 5 years, um, I'm seeing a broader understanding of well-being. So just last week, the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who wrote a book about the loneliness epidemic we're experiencing. That team just launched the framework for mental health and well-being for the workplace. So it focuses on two fundamental human needs: the need to be safe and the need to be secure. And then they have 5 pillars in that. I highly recommend you looking at it. It's a wonderful document, but it's focused on connection and community, work-life harmony, this idea of mattering at work, and then opportunities for growth. So, and then all of that work is centered on the worker voice and equity. And um, then so I think with that broader understanding of well-being, that's certainly now becoming part of our dialogue, and lots of change that's going to be happening over the next 5 years, especially as this becoming more of a thing within the world with the U.S. Surgeon General. And then number 2, I would say, is this idea of equity design and the reckoning that we've been having as a country. So ever since George Floyd was murdered and the uprisings that happened in the world that followed it, there was this huge outcry for us to see people of color as fellow humans, and quite literally that all Black Lives Matter, or that was a slip, Black Lives Matter. But it spurred tons of conversations around equity, diversity, and inclusion and belonging. But what those conversations have just been very performative, and the work was often led to friends of mine, a lot of friends of mine, and other people that I've witnessed who are people of color to lead the work. But we're seeing things like we're not making as much progress as we would hope. And also, we're hitting the same challenges and hopping over hurdles to get the work done. And that those people who have been on the front lines for the past few years are burnt out. So I anticipate in the near term that there will be kind of a next wave of people who take on these challenges that may or may not be led by people of color, but there might be other heart-centered people who are the ones who are like the next wave coming through, kind of as reinforcements. And as a result of that, I think there's some remixed frameworks for how we can do the work moving forward that's going to come out. For example, one of the things I just joined about a month ago is I'm a founding member for the Institute for Equity Design and Justice. And it's a new entity being formed by this amazing organization that's tackling systemic racism with redesigning systems of oppression. And it's based in St. Louis, Missouri, and it's called the Creative Reaction Lab. So, going back to that idea of what I was talking about before of shifting power, giving more agency to people to change the world around them. And then finally, the last thing that I'm seeing, which is bringing this all full circle, is that communities are going to be growing in popularity. So especially now that we're coming back after the pandemic, this time has been a period of intense anxiety, of loneliness and turmoil. New communities are going to be emerging that is focused on the whole individual. So that idea of belonging, collaboration, cooperation, and the concept I would bring here is that the idea of creating community is something that is foreign to a lot of people because our society usually forms us into networks of people. And somebody who I feature as well in my work is named John Paul Gatto, and he was a public school teacher in New York City for 30 years. So a lot of us are kind of popping into networks which only see a piece of who we are and how like kind of divides us into parts. So networks are very large and anonymous, and it's usually top down, and it's just really a passive environment, and it's based on consumption. On the other side is community, which, like I said before, like it sees us as a whole flawed human. It's a place where we face each other over time and all our human variety, the good parts, the bad parts, and all the rest. And that kind of work, that kind of spaces, and once you find a space, it really helps promote the highest quality of life possible, lives we can be engaged and participate. And sometimes they're small and organic that comes up. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And and then that kind of this helps swing us into that direction, which was making for Dr. King's vision to create that beloved community everywhere where everywhere we roam at the end of the day. So Dr. King's vision of equity, of caring for our fellow humans is going to be something I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of in the next 5 years.
Wow. Some fantastic comments there to kind of finish things up with, because I know we are approaching time here. I don't even know where to begin to to respond to all of those. Like first and foremost, I'm definitely going to be tuning into your podcast. I think everyone could use a little bit of empathy energization. So if that's even a word, I could use it. So I'll definitely be checking that out. Thank you so much for sharing that. I couldn't agree more with the growing broader understanding of well-being. I think it's definitely at the forefront of a lot of people's mind, and if it's not, it will be soon. Especially if you have anything to say about it. I love your comment about the community, because that's something that we are really passionate about as well, building communities. And I do agree there's a big difference between communities and networks, and that's something that we really try to focus on is making it more of a community and having the engagement and things like that. So absolutely fantastic chatting with you, Amy. I could definitely see why empathy keeps coming through as your top skill, because it pours out of you in every response you've had and comment you make today. And I'm really excited to have the takeaways that I got today from talking to you. I have a few things that got my wheels turning, so I know our listeners definitely will as well. So thank you again. You're such an extraordinary person and partner in innovation. I look forward to seeing the difference you're going to make with everything you have going on and your unique approaches to everything. Maybe I'll just pass the virtual mic back over to you to to just make any final last comments, and then I can sign us off here for the day.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, and also to HeroX for having me today. I've been following your journey, and it's not easy kind of being in this world trying to get our messages out. So I really appreciate the conversation that we've been having today. I guess it's more about me just like telling the world what I'm about and what I'm doing, but I would love to continue the dialogue with you and anybody else who's listening today and beyond. And you can all reach me on my social media, and it's at Real Amy J. Wilson. There's a whole story behind that, and if you DM me, I will tell you the story.
Yeah, make sure it's the real one, not the fake
The
Amy
real
J.
one.
Wilson. Yeah. Amazing. Well, we're happy to continue the conversation. As I mentioned at the start, we had a tough time deciding where our focus was going to be today, and we went the full hour. So, I think we'll definitely have to have you back on to talk about some of the other things you're passionate about. But that's it for today. Thank you, everyone who joined Amy and I live. I think it was a fantastic session. That a lot of takeaways came from. Keep your sights on this powerful leader as she continues to redefine the way we build and sustain cultures of innovation with social good as a mission. You can find Amy here on Twitter or LinkedIn directly, as she mentioned. To all our listeners who joined in live, if you have any questions or anything post-show, please feel free to shoot either of us a message. We're always happy to connect and continue these conversations. Again, my name is Adam Olsen, and I'm preferably contacted through LinkedIn. You can catch this session and past episodes at innovationheroes.buzzsprout.com. The link to the recording will be made available along with handy content snippets that you can use to forward your own innovation goals. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care, guys.